All right, everyone, we are going to start back up. Hope you enjoyed the break and took advantage of the time to visit with our vendors and check out some of the resources. It is time to meet our next speaker for the evening, Pamela Wisniewski. Dr. Wisniewski is an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Central Florida. She's an expert in human-computer interaction whose research lies at the intersection of social computing and privacy. She's especially interested in the interplay between social media, privacy, and online strategy for adolescents. She was one of the first researchers to recognize the need for a resilience-based approach rather than an abstinence-based approach to adolescent online safety, and to back this stance up with empirical data. She has authored over 60 peer-reviewed publications and has won multiple best papers, which means top 1%, and best paper honorable mentions, top 5%, at top conferences in her field. Will you please welcome Dr. Pamela Wisniewski.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. Didn't that sound like a really impressive bio? I sound really cool. Well, let me start with a little bit about me, because obviously there's a reason why somebody would do research on teens and their online safety, right? Rather than doing something in machine learning or artificial intelligence, as all the other computer science people in my department do. Well, when I started my PhD program, I was doing research on interpersonal boundary regulations, or how we manage our boundaries with others on social media, and I framed that as privacy. So my dissertation was on privacy and social media. What's that sound like? You're like, what's that? That's like an oxymoron, right? Well, what I realized in my dissertation is that even adults have a hard time managing their boundaries with others on social media. Would you say that's true, adults? Yeah, right. And so when I started my postdoc at Penn State University, I started doing research on privacy and teens. And the grant proposal that I was working on was related to building the case that if we could raise teens' privacy awareness and make them more concerned about their privacy because they keep going and divulging all of this information about themselves online, then they would just be safer. And while there was some truth in that, I realized there was a lot of victim blaming in that too. That we use a lot of judgment when we talk about our youth. And the same problems that adults have on trying to keep ourselves safe and manage our boundaries and set healthy boundaries with others online are some of the same things that teens are having, but teens are doing this for the first time. The other thing that the research said was parental mediation is the key to keeping teens safe online. Do you agree with that? Does that sound right? To some extent, yeah, right? The protective factors, like having youth groups or a community to rely on. But here I was reading that research as a teen who was sexually abused from the ages of 9 to 14 by her mom's boyfriend, who no longer lived with her mom after she was 14 because one of those first technology pieces that came out, video cameras, he actually video cameraed me in the shower. And even though I had that evidence to show my mom, she decided to stay with him and send me to go live with my sister. So then, my 16th birthday, I ended up living with my other sister, and my senior year in high school, I was living on my own, and I worked as the cashier at a Jiffy Lube. So here are all these academics telling me that the only way to keep teens safe online is for them to have actively engaged parents to protect them. So as a human-computer interaction researcher, who now has a fancy PhD, one of the things that we do is we take a user-centered view into the population that we're researching. And so when we talk about online safety of adolescents, who's the user? Teens, right? But if you think about online safety, who do we design for? So if you're going to install one of those apps to keep your teens safe online, and you're going to do the Google search and Google Play, what words do you type? What kind of app? Is it a teen online safety app? Or is it called a parental control app? So I embarked on this journey to try to take a more teen-centered view on adolescent online safety. And this is my research. So some background information is that Pew Research did a study in 2018 to understand what teens thought about social media use and whether or not it was a positive or a negative force in their life. Overall, the reviews were mixed. 31% of teens said that it had a net positive advantage to their lives because it helped connect them with others and give them resources that they need and be able to garner support. Another 45% were ambivalent, and 24% said that it was mostly a negative impact on their lives because of things such as rumors and drama and bullying and that constant social pressure, some of the things that Steve already talked about. So even teens see that there's challenges with being online and being on social media. But when we talk about online safety for our youth, we often talk in the terms of online narratives of risk. So these are some statistics from Crimes Against Children Research Center, and they've probably been updated since 2012. But we often talk about the types of risks that teens can encounter online that put them in harm's way. We also say and show research that says that cyberbullying, online sexual solicitations, and all of these other risk factors can really detrimentally harm our youth, equating them with depression, low self-esteem, reduced mental health, well-being, suicidal ideation, and having offline sex encounters with strangers. That sounds scary, right? Well, the news headlines don't really do much to calm our fears, do they? We often hear stories about teens who are gang raped, and then a video is spread virally through their school, and then they're cyberbullied, and to sometimes it leads to the worst situation, where a teen dies by suicide. But what the news headlines are doing is they're promoting a psychology of fear. What do you think I mean by that? Do you find the news to be unbiased and an objective source of news reporting for other things such as politics? So maybe the news likes to sensationalize a little bit and focus on the extreme and the most negative cases out there. For instance, one of the main news channels came to interview me on campus in my office. They made me do like this fake typing thing on my computer for like 15 minutes. It was really weird. And I was expecting to be on like their morning news show. I waited a few weeks, nothing showed up. And then they found like an attorney, not even like an attorney general or anything, but just like some attorney in Alabama who basically told them the story that they wanted. That because your teens have mobile phones, they're all at risk for getting sex trafficked, and they're all at risk for all of these horrible things that can happen to them online. The news didn't want to hear about the positive stories or even the more well-balanced stories about teens who don't encounter these things and overcome some of these risks. And so when we make our decisions as parents based on fear, we want to hold on tighter, and we want to protect, and sometimes we want to control things a little bit more because we don't like the unknown. Are there any parents in the room who grew up with social media? Were some of your parents concerned about how much you watched TV as a kid? Was it going to ruin our generation? So when we talk about the psychology of fear and parenting and online safety and risk, we have to take into account that, yes, teens are dealing with some majorly heavy stuff that we don't understand. But instead of parenting based on fear, we need to parent based on empathy and understanding. But what we do is often take this knee-jerk reaction where we want to protect teens from risks at all cost. So even in the research, we often emphasize those high-risk narratives by doing Gallup poll surveys asking teens, have you ever had an unwanted sexual solicitation online? And then taking those really high numbers and those statistics to say, see, look how much at risk our teens are online. Let's protect them. Let's do something to get rid of this fear. And what this does is promotes a very risk-averse approach to online safety. How can we prevent our teens from encountering cyberbullying or porn or getting an unwanted sexual solicitation online? Another thing that it does is that it makes us assume that all risk exposure online equates to harm. So we can assume that any cyberbullying is bad, or any time somebody unwanted online asks a teen for a naked picture, it's bad, and that the teen is harmed. But is that true? Could two teens potentially see the same naked image online from a pop-up ad or something like that? And for one teen, it could be no big deal, or they decide to close it and block that website. But for another teen, it could lead to the beginning or a gateway to a porn addiction. So we have to realize that there's some nuance when we talk about these things with online risk. And because we're focusing so heavily on being risk adverse, we're focusing less on how to teach teens how to cope with some of these risks when they occur. Looking at the research on teens and technology, again, we look at some things like privacy as a preventative approach to online safety. So if teens don't put their real name out on Facebook or do other things like that, then they can be safe. But what are some of the things that we know about teens, just as a developmental stage? Are they more social than younger children? Do they want more autonomy from their parents? Are they trying to form their self-identities? So in doing all of these things, there's a lot of beneficial things that the internet can provide teens to helping them fill into the shoes of their adolescence and grow and mature into adults. So telling teens to say, okay, don't go online, you're not allowed to use social media at all, you have to make that decision as a parent as to whether that's right for your teen. We've also focused a lot on families and technology and rule setting and risk prevention through parental mediation, which often leads to control. And I'll talk about a little bit about that in my research. While all of this research is beneficial, yes, we should teach teens how to set the privacy settings on Instagram. We should teach them that those disappearing snaps don't actually disappear. There are potential limitations of this research. First, taking only a risk-adverse approach to online safety won't work. If we try to tell our teens that everybody you meet online is a predator, then they're not going to listen. Because they know that there are good people online and there are bad people online. And so if we teach them how to discern between those different types of people, that might bode better than us just saying, hey, stay away from all strangers online. It also creates what I call a new privacy paradox. Because on one hand, we're telling teens, you need to care more about your online privacy so that you can be safe. But on the other hand, we're installing invasive privacy controls or parental control apps that then take all of their privacy away. And so, as parents, can we have it both ways? And most importantly, it doesn't teach teens how to protect themselves. I call this kind of a white privileged assumption that all teens have active and engaged parents, because obviously, not all of us do. And instead, we should consider ways that we can empower teens and teach them, as Common Sense Media says, how to be good digital citizens and how to engage safely online. This is a quote from Dana Boyd, her book, It's Complicated, The Social Lives of Networked Teens. See, as a researcher, even with all of that fancy bio, I still quote other researchers. I love this quote because it says, as a society, we spend so much time worrying about young people that we fail to account for how our paternalism and protectionism hinders teens' ability to become informed, thoughtful, and engaged adults. So some of the first research that I want to present today is on those parental control apps that some parents choose to install on their teens' phones, about 16% of parents. We did a study to look at these apps to really understand the types of feature sets in these apps. Now, as a computer interaction person, this is the type of research that we do. So the first thing that I did is I created this conceptual framework of teen online safety strategies, or just different paradigms for which that we protect our teens or moderate what they're doing online. On the left side are means for parental control. These come from research back in the early 70s, 80s, from Valkenburg on how we manage co-viewing TV monitoring. So for instance, monitoring, which is passive surveillance or co-viewing, restrictions, setting like limits, such as you can't watch TV after 8 p.m., and then active mediation, where we actually sit with our teens and talk to them about what they're watching on TV. So these measures have also been used in the technology space as well. But what I was interested in was on the right-hand side. How can we translate some of these ideas from parental control towards empowering teens towards self-regulation? So the equivalent of monitoring by parents would be self-monitoring by teens, helping teens be more aware of what they're doing online so that they can make better decisions themselves. One of the apps that we saw in this feature analysis was an app called Rethink that was developed by a 15-year-old girl. It was a really novel app because all the other ones were more like parental control. It used basically a key logger and some natural language processing to detect when a teen was about to send a malicious message. So it essentially worked kind of like that drunk texting app that you guys have probably heard about already, to where it would ask the teen whether or not they were sure they really wanted to send that message, right? And so the novelty of that design is that it was trying to stop cyberbullying at the source. Also, impulse control. So instead of restricting teens as to what they can and cannot do, how do we teach them to control those impulses and to not do something that would otherwise long-term have some negative consequences? And then risk coping. Instead of trying to shield them and protect them from risks, how can we teach teens how to cope and deal and manage these online risks in a way that prevents harm? So we downloaded and installed 75 parental control apps from Google Play. And we did a qualitative analysis. I won't get all researchy on you. But we found 42 unique features and 382 instances of these features. And we mapped them to this TOS framework. I should have brought water. What we found is that by far, the majority of these applications, which most of them were called parental control apps, focused only on parental monitoring and restriction. So for instance, acting like spyware or a Trojan horse on the teen's phone to where they ran in a covert mode, and teens didn't even know they were there. And then it would send a parent every text message or every message on social media that the teen center received. Otherwise, they were very restrictive to the point that it set screen time limits for the teen, to where it would basically make their phone a paperweight. And all of the other strategies for monitoring were less represented across these app features. And unpacking it a little more as to the types of things that these apps monitored or restricted is mostly what the teen could browse, the apps they could install or not install on their phones. But where teens encounter most of the risks, social media, they were less likely monitored. One reason is the whole Cambridge Analytica breach, and so now the APIs to be able to get the information from social media apps isn't available for these apps to monitor. But what was most interesting is that for teens, the #1 feature, because many of these apps didn't even have an interface for teens, was an SOS feature. What does SOS mean? It's a signal for help. So essentially, what are we telling youth or teens by the only feature that we give them for online safety is a feature to call for help? Are we telling them, you can't be trusted, you aren't going to be able to handle this on your own, and that you need help from an adult, right? And so I'm not against parental control apps, but I believe that we should all be thoughtful about the features that are embedded within these apps so that they don't change your natural parenting style of how you would monitor your teens offline to something that you wouldn't do for monitoring them online. So just be thoughtful about the apps that you're using to monitor your children. The next thing we did is we scraped the reviews of these apps from Google Play Store, and there were 100,000 of them. But then we manually looked and we saw that there were a lot of reviews written by teens, because it said things like, my parents, or I'm a 16-year-old. And so we gathered 736 of these reviews to understand what teens thought about these parental control apps. Overall, teens mostly gave these apps a 1-star review. And even though it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, because obviously teens aren't going to like that these apps are on their phones, we wanted to read between the lines as to why. So it wasn't that teens were being restricted from doing those negative things that they wanted to do. These apps were so restrictive that they wouldn't let the teen do anything they needed to do, to the point that they weren't able to look up kittens or be able to do their homework. And so the teens talked about the oppression of how this app blocks about everything, and it couldn't even go to their homework website. And so for the teens, it was frustrating for them. These apps were privacy invasive. Over and over again, we saw reviews that said that this app would cause trust issues with my parents, and that because of this app, we've grown farther apart. Other teens equated parental control apps to being stalked by their parents because they weren't able to have a private conversation with their biological father, their boyfriend, or other people without the prying eyes of their parents. So, do you believe that a teen needs some level of privacy as they get older? Okay. Teens also felt that these apps were equated to lazy parenting, They wanted their parents to talk to them more about what they were doing instead of just installing this app. And they even said, well, you know, these apps are okay for like a 10-year-old, but I'm 15 and my mom is still using this app. I've actually talked to some teens that are 18 and 19, and they still have parental control apps on their phones. But there was a silver lining. Some of the teens liked these apps because they realized they helped them control unhealthy behaviors. For instance, porn addictions. This 13-year-old said, here, I'm getting this app for myself because they realized that they were addicted to the internet and to their phone, and so they needed something to help them manage their screen time. And here, a teen is talking about how, well, the parents installed it at first to protect them from porn, and even though the teen found a way around it, they realized that they wanted to form trust with their parent, and so it helped them deal with some of these unhealthy behaviors. And then other teens liked apps that had some kind of negotiation feature. And there are apps out there that let teens request more time or be able to do chores and have some kind of conversation with their parents. And those were the apps that the teens tended to like a little bit more because it gave them some level of agency to help negotiate boundaries with their parents. So mapping the teen reviews back to the features that these apps had, we saw a pretty direct correlation that the features that the teens disliked the most were the ones for parental control, which are the features that are most strongly embedded within these apps. Meanwhile, the positive reviews from teens actually mapped to the features that gave them more power, more say in that relationship with their parent and what they were doing online. And so we could see that there's some level of teens wanting to be able to self-regulate with the guidance and help of their parents. So this led me to look back in the literature, not on the HCI literature, but on the developmental psychology literature. And I found this really awesome theoretical framework called resilience. The idea behind resilience is that it's a strength-based approach that focuses on the ways that teens can develop competencies and be able to overcome risks based on their assets and strengths in spite of negative things happening to them. But the thing that I loved about this framework is that it explicitly mentioned that resilience cannot occur in the absence of risk. For instance, you, my friend, are quite resilient. If you are a successful, well-adjusted adult, but you never had anything that you had to overcome or anything that you had to deal with, would you be considered resilient? Or would you be considered lucky or blessed, right? And so in using resilience as a lens in my research, we conducted a diary study of 68 parent and teen pairs, where we had them fill out 8 weeks of reports on 4 different types of online risks that the teen could encounter: information breaches, online harassment, sexual solicitations, and exposure to explicit content. We received 209 risk reports by teens. By far, the majority of them were exposure to explicit content, and only 80 reports from parents. And the results of the study were actually quite positive and surprising, because we were thinking that we were going to be telling this fear-based narrative of all of these horrible things happening to teens. But instead, we found that 87% of the reports that were reported during the diary study were only to low to medium severity of risk, where teens felt some level of discomfort, but they didn't actually encounter like actual harm from that. 84% of the risk reported suggested that teens did not intentionally seek out the risk experiences. I know that we like the narrative that teens are very risk-seeking, and so they're the ones getting themselves into trouble. But based on their own reports, that wasn't necessarily the case. 47% of the reports showed that teens took active measures to cope with the risk. For instance, teens said no. They confronted somebody who caused an information breach, such as posting a picture that was unwanted of them. They removed themselves from unwanted situations, they blocked people, and they actively sought help when things got out of hand. And 49% of the reports were considered resolved by the time during the week that they made that report. 17% of the reports were so insignificant that the teen said that it didn't even need a resolution. And the silver lining here is that many of these experiences often gave teens the opportunity to build important social skills, such as interpersonal boundary regulation, problem solving, and conflict resolution, as well as empathy for others. Oops. So some of the takeaways from the diary study from the entries that the teens gave us is that teens are seeing more online than you think. Here the teen says, oh hun, it's the internet. Half of it's porn to start with, the other half is contaminated by violent material, illegal material, depression, anxiety, and morally dubious events by nature. It would be really a miracle if you managed to be on the internet without any exposure to it. A 13-year-old told us about how she saw somebody cutting and how she used empathy to comment on the stranger's post, stay strong. But she was upset still because she felt that one comment couldn't save her life. And this wasn't something that the teen told her mom during the study. Another thing that we often don't hear in those news media reports is that most often, teens said no. So even if a teen received a whole bunch of unwanted sexual solicitations online, and we see a statistic saying that this many teens have been sexually solicited online, we often don't see that number of saying, well, this is how many times they said no. And so we need to hear that as well. Sometimes teens said yes. And as a parent myself, a quote like this kind of makes you a little queasy and like, right? It makes you like a little uncomfortable. What were you doing when you were a 16-year-old boy? And so I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable, but I'm trying to maybe make you think a little bit, to move beyond some of those fear-based narratives to seeing what teens are doing online. Less often, but it did happen, sometimes it got serious. This teen, boy asked her for a naked picture. She sent it to him. He sent it to everybody else, and they bullied her. And this was the only time during our study that we had to enact our mandated child abuse reporting status because she expressed suicidal ideation. Her mom was told that it was a fake naked picture, not an actual one. The silver lining of this story is that later on during the same study, the teen encountered a similar situation, and she said, I already learned from my mistakes, and she didn't do it again. So teens are learning from some of these mistakes, but also need to learn when the mistake might be so significant that it can't be taken back. The most concerning part about this diary study was that most of these parents were in the dark. Even though this study was primarily Caucasian families from two-parent affluent homes, the ones that are considered the more actively mediating parents because they're the ones participating in research on adolescent online safety, like those of you here who are attending a workshop like this, family communication was so poor that in less than 7% of the reports did the account match between the parent and the teen. In 38% of the reports, parents had no communication about online risk at all, meaning that anything that the parent reported or the teen reported were completely separate incidents. We gave them separate logins for the study for their privacy. Also, parental misconceptions in their actual responses actually made the situation work and encouraged the teens not to go to their parents to talk to them about what they were experiencing online. So from the pre-survey, we already got a sense that there was a disconnect between parents and teens. So here, when we asked them about their level of family communication, this is the mean for parents and teens based on a 5-point scale. Parents thought they had significantly better communication with their teens than their teens. Parents thought that they used more active mediation and monitoring for their teens, but their teens said that their parents used significantly more restrictive mediation. And interestingly, when asked about their digital literacy for how to be safe online, parents reported lower literacy for online safety than their teens. One of the questions that we asked during the study was who was to blame? So in the unmatched reports, it was most likely that the teen said that the risk exposure was accidental, that they didn't mean for it to happen. It was just something that filtered through their Vine or their Facebook feed or their Twitter feed. But parents often assumed that the teens in their reports were victimized, or on the flip side, that it was intentional, that their teen meant for it to happen, it was their fault. This pattern changed in those 7% of matched reports where the parents often started to say that the teen was victimized, but the teen themselves admitted to having a little bit higher level of agency in what happened. For instance, that same teen, she explained that I didn't intend for it to happen. He told me that he wouldn't show anybody, and my dumb self believed him. Whereas the mother said, no, she sent him that fake naked picture because she just wanted him to leave her alone. In terms of family communication, teens were more likely to say that they did not and would not tell their parents what happened, while parents were most likely to say that their teens told them, that they guessed or they found out. When teens told their parents, they did this to ask for help. And often, teens explained that they were shocked or disgusted or confused by what happened. But in those matched reports, the parent, because they thought they had such good levels of communication with their teen, often felt like it was just an FYI. We're so close, so she just mentioned it to me in passing. And so this was a missed opportunity for a lot of parents because they thought their teens would just come to them and talk to them about what's going on online, that when their teen actually did, they didn't take that opportunity to help unpack it for their teens. Why teens didn't tell their parents? One, because they thought it was no big deal. Just like that Ohun quote where the teen said, the internet's just all of this horrible stuff and that's par for the course. They just thought, hey, this is what we see online. It's pretty normal. And they thought that if they ever told their parent about it, they would just cause unnecessary awkwardness because their parent wasn't exposed to this type of thing when they were young, so they just wouldn't understand. And the worst is that they thought their parents would overreact, because many times their parents did overreact. And they often punished them for things that weren't their fault. For instance, somebody seeing a naked or inappropriate picture in one of their news feeds because somebody else posted it, and then their parent would restrict them from being on social media and being with their friends. So it was this really tough situation where sometimes teens wanted to talk to their parents, but they felt like if they did, it would be totally awkward and they would get in trouble. When the parents were rarely involved, they did use active mediation, and some of the parents were really engaged and helped their teens deal with some major issues like cyberbullying and some sexual solicitations. But oftentimes, some of the active mediation sounded a lot more like a lecture. For instance, this mother talking about her teen playing violent video games, she said, I think it's childish and ridiculous, a waste of time. He's actually watching me type this now, so he knows how I feel about it. So later in the study, the teen told us that he was looking up marijuana intoxication levels just because he was thinking about experimenting with it. And when we asked him whether or not he told his parent about it, what do you think he said? No. And so often, parents overreacted when their teens encountered low-risk situations online, which then made the teens realize that when they were dealing with some heavier stuff, they didn't feel like they could trust their parents to go to talk to them about what was happening. Here's a paired, these are matched reports between a parent and a teen, where this mom said that she violated the rule even though it wasn't a sexually suggestive picture. And the teen explained, well, I just sent a picture of me smiling. I thought the punishment was excessive for what I did. And so we don't have any more context on those quotes and who this boy was, but you can see that there's tensions between parents and teens when it comes to the online interactions that they're having. So at the end of the 2 months, parents reported significantly lower levels of family communication than in their pre-surveys, but it was still significantly higher than what their teens reported. And these quotes were very telling, where the mother said, I realize that I've given my daughter a lot of trust online, where the teen said that my parents just don't really know what I'm doing online, no matter how much they really think they know. So what do you think about that? Parental mediation is the key to keep teens safe online. So what else did we learn? Well, we did a cross-lags effect study to see how long the negative effects of cyberbullying, sexual solicitations, and exposure to explicit contact lasted, and where we saw some negative effects in the first week. We also saw some positive effects on well-being and positive affect for cyberbullying. So we thought, well, maybe what's happening is when teens are being bullied online, they're also soliciting some support, because teens often talk to their parents and they felt better after the fact. And so this showed that there was both a positive and negative of some of these online interactions. But in the second and third weeks after risk exposure, all of these significant effects disappeared. And so they didn't last past the week that they made the report. We also found that resilience was what mattered most. We asked teens to report their level of internet addiction, and we found that that was associated with their online risk exposure, and that online risk exposure and internet addiction were associated with negative psychological outcomes. But when we asked them to measure or self-report on their level of resilience, those negative effects ultimately disappeared. And so what is this concept of resilience? It's that sense of being able to bounce back. But I want to do a word of caution. Does anybody know what this picture is? Survivor bias. Now I'm getting too academic for you, aren't I? Right. You are very smart. So what this is the military after some world war did a study on the planes that came back to try to understand how to better reinforce these planes to keep them safe. And so they studied and saw where all of the bullet holes on the planes were, and so they reinforced all of those places on the planes. So do you think that would work and make the planes stronger and safer and more resilient? Why not? Because these are the planes that came back. These weren't the planes that got shot down and didn't make it back. And so how does this relate to teens and online safety? So the diary study that I did shows you that maybe the news reports aren't necessarily as bad as it is for everybody. But there are also some potential survivor bias from my study, because these are teens who made it through a 2-month diary study of reporting the risks online. And there are teens who had parents who were willing to do the study with them. But you also have to realize there's a victim bias of our news media and of social media. That when you see all of these reports of all of the evils of social media and how at risk our children are, that it's going the opposite direction. And so we need to kind of balance this out and realize that the truth is somewhere in between. That if we treat all teens as victims and at our high risk for all of these horrible things to happen, then one, we're disadvantaging those youth who actually really need our help. And what we find in the research often is that the teens who struggle offline are usually the teens who struggle the most online. And so with this word of caution, I'm just asking you to not go into that psychology of fear and realize that there's both benefits and risks associated with internet use. For instance, we did a study with foster parents of adolescents, and we found that this was a particularly high-risk population where teens were encountering things such as sex trafficking and trauma, and therefore the parents felt like they had no other option than to take away all technology access in the home. And this created what we called a new digital divide, because parents weren't taking away technology because they couldn't afford it. It was because they wanted to keep these teens safe. So what can we do? Both of these articles are based on peer-reviewed, published research, and they're probably both right. Because it depends on whether the effects of social media and technology use is positive or negative on our youth. We can't base anything off of an average because each teen is a unique individual. So let's resist those fear-based narratives and stop arguing about whether social media and smartphones are evil, but try to find ways to support our youth to optimize the benefits, to make them creators, and to minimize or mitigate the downside. We also should think about online safety as part of the developmental process of teens growing up, because we can't pretend it doesn't exist, right? So for instance, at the age, and I put a broad range here because it's up to the parent when they first introduce technology to their teen or to their younger child, that's a good time when you should use those parental controls. When you're first giving them the technology as younger children and they're not seeking that autonomy and that separation from their parents. And not using those parental controls to police them, but instead to teach and to guide them how to use technology safely and responsibly. And then as teens get a little bit older, teach them how to navigate potentially risky situations instead of trying to shield them and protect them from them. For instance, have a conversation with your teen on some exit strategies of what they should do if a romantic interest asks them for a naked picture. Instead of just telling them it's forbidden, it's bad, it's evil, it's fear. And then also teach them some coping skills. As Steve mentioned, suicide is the second leading cause of death for adolescents and young adults. That means at some point in your teen's life, they're probably going to have a friend, if it's not themselves, talking to them about some heavy issues with mental health. Prepare them for that. And then as your teen gets older, 16, 17, 18, learn to trust them because you raised them well so that they can make good decisions online. But still, set those clear boundaries and let them know that you're there to help if they need you. That's when you take that deep breath, do some self-regulation, and be there for them instead of freaking out because you're scared. Would you give your teen the keys to your car and just say, go at it? No like driver's ed, no no state manual, no, like, would you? Anybody do that? Then why do we do that with technology and social media? Because parents often take this stance of, well, I'll just let them have it and they can use it. And once they break my trust, then I'm bringing the hammer down. Guess what? If you don't teach your kid how to drive, they will get into a wreck. Because social skills are the same as the skills of teaching somebody to drive. Well, they're different, but the point is that it's a skill. Do you know how to deal with cyberbullying, or did you the first time you were bullied? Did you know how to deal with that social comparison of when somebody was trying to say that they were better than you? Your teen doesn't know how to do that, and now it's been escalated because they're doing that much more frequently through social media than we did going to school as children. Support them and listen to them. We did an analysis of an online peer support forum for teens and young adults. And one of the things that we noticed is that sexting is now a part of a lot of teen relationships. And if we continue to treat it as something that's deviant and that they just should point blank not do, they're not going to tell us, and they're going to be worried about being judged. And this teen here even said she's 15 and she's safe because she hasn't sent any nudes yet. So she's thinking about how to do it safely, but it might be helpful as parents and as educators and as clinicians that we make this part of the typical training for online or for sex education. How can we do some of these things safely? What are the pros and the cons? And what shouldn't you do? Because giving teens the tools to make some of these decisions more wisely will help them make better decisions overall. Often, because we're parents and we didn't grow up with these technologies, we often treat online risk as more deviant than offline risk. Here's an example from my personal life. Back in 2000, I started dating this guy, and he told me he had a Yahoo dating profile. And I was appalled. I was like, oh, you are like some sicko. In 2007, I met my husband on Match.com. So, we are in a new world, and we're doing new things. And the norms about what's good and evil are changing and evolving. And so where your parents might have thought it was, like I thought Bart Simpson and The Simpsons was like the most risque TV show that I ever saw, like when I was a kid. And today it's like family wholesome. So realize that your children are evolving. And I'm not saying follow that slippery slope, but also I'm saying to try to meet them where they are, because if you're so far over here and they're over here, you're never going to be able to get them to hear you. Because teens want to share with us, they want guidance and help, but they don't want to be judged. And finally, it's important to empower youth. So that funky like structural equation model that I showed you, this was the scale that the teens answered. Some of the questions. I'm able to adapt when change occurs. I can deal with whatever comes my way. These are concepts of resilience. How can we teach our teens to stand on their own? Because they're going to be online. They're going to encounter these risks. How can we give them the knowledge and the confidence to know that we're there to support them, but they can protect themselves? So in my research, I'm trying to continue to bring this new narrative to the news media, and we've gotten some coverage. but it's still not the mainstream narrative that's out there of teaching teens how to engage safely online, emphasizing the positive over the risks. And so there's a lot more research to be done, and this is the research I'm doing. I would love it if any of you wanted to reach out to me to participate in any of the research studies that we're doing and to learn more about my research. And this is the nerdy geek professor things that we do. I have the Socio-Technical Interaction Research, or the STIR lab, because we like to mix it up, at the University of Central Florida. And I live in Orlando, so I'm sure all of you will probably visit there in the next few years with your kids. But I thank you for listening to my talk today. And I actually have 4 more minutes left, so I probably went a little long. Did anybody have any questions? Yes?
How do you do that when they have a very limited opinion of your knowledge of online media as a whole, even though that's your job? So.
Well, the hard answer is that you need to learn more about it, right? And the other answer is ask them to help educate you, because then you're showing respect for what they know that you don't know, and you're being open to them, and they'll probably be more open to you. I've seen some research on sex ed with children that said that you're supposed to have kind of the birds and the bees talk with children before puberty, like when they're 7, 8, 9, instead of waiting until they're 13, 14, 15, and they're less open to those types of discussions. And while we haven't studied it, anecdotally, I think that's also true for online safety talks, is talking to your children when they're children and they're not always rolling their eyes at you. And doing it with a level of respect that you're also trying to learn a little bit more about their world. That's a great question. Over there. Yes, there's lots of research that shows that boys and girls are different. Generally, boys do more video games and girls use more social media. Girls tend to receive more online sexual solicitations than boys. That seems empirically true. And so there are different experiences between the genders. Right. And if I had a solution, I would be a millionaire. But I have some tips. So one thing that I do is I suggest that parents treat online risk as they would offline risks. So how would you talk to your teen about bullying? Or how would you talk to your teen about sex? And then try to apply some of those same principles of how you have those conversations with them to how you have the conversations with them about online risks. So a lot of it is more the social interactions and the interpersonal skills than it is technology. Like, privacy settings can only do so much, right? There's some great resources on there about how to and even go to Common Sense Media's website, because they have a lot of great resources. I pull those all the time. They have great resources on how to go against the bystander effect. What's the bystander effect? So like if I fell down on the floor and I was like choking, would all of you come and rescue me? I really hope so. Well, the bystander effect is like something that happens for bullying where everybody thinks that somebody else will intervene, so nobody does. And so that's one of the things that happens on social media with bullying. And so teaching teens that it's okay to stand up on the behalf of somebody who's being bullied and how to do that. So teaching those interpersonal skills and not thinking that it's a technology problem, because it's a people problem, it's a social problem, more so than the technology, which just amplifies those problems. Anything else? I can't see anybody because of these
Right
lights. Hi.
Hi. So I agree that going through your struggles does create resiliency. However, the one picture that you did show had the picture of cutting, and I've heard that, you know, it's great that they want to be there and encourage them, but I've also heard that 14-year-old or a young kid like that didn't feel like they could go to sleep because they felt like they were the only person that could help that person. So
Right.
they take on that parental.
They do.
And that I don't think is healthy. So
I agree. I wouldn't call that healthy in any means. But it is, that quote illustrated more that the teen was showing empathy, which was good, but it also showed that these teens are dealing with some heavy stuff that we should start talking to them about before they have to deal with it. So for instance, talking to our teens about how you would help a friend who was suicidal or cutting, instead of them being shocked by it because they come across it on social media for the first time and we haven't talked to them about it. And one of the resources for telling them how to cope with that might be, hey, you're 13 years old and you're not responsible for this person, and what are some of the things that we could do to maybe change your settings so that you can choose what you see in your newsfeed. That's one of the most important things that we saw, is that teens felt like they didn't have any control over what they were seeing. So maybe helping them make better decisions on what they can control that they're seeing by talking to them about who they let into their circles, their privacy settings, and whatnot. And so, yes, I agree. Like, resilience only goes so far. There's also like toxic resilience, where you just keep going and plugging away even though it's detrimental and harmful and you should be running away. So again, I'm trying to give that balanced approach. I wouldn't go and say, oh, well, see, this 13-year-old girl is helping some stranger with cutting. So it's just more of a, how could we help teach our teens how to interpret those types of situations and how to respond? That's a great question. And thank you for helping me make that point.
Hi, I'm at the very back.
Hello.
So I heard you talk a lot about the research on negative things of social media and anything online with teenagers. I was wondering if there were any research that you know of the positives of the internet and what it can bring to teenagers that could be a positive impact on their life instead of such negative impacts?
Yeah, there's a ton of research on that as well, but that's not my research. But some of the things that we, as the research community, have found is that the internet's a really good place for LGBTQ youth, for instance, to be able to seek support and to be able to find resources. When we're studying this online mental health forum for teens, them being able to reach out for help is beneficial. And then there's a lot of research on the benefits of being creators over consumers of online technologies. Like, for instance, kids who are doing the user-generated content and becoming activists at early ages. So all of those things are ways that youth are using technology in positive ways to be empowered. So yes, there is research out there. My research is on online safety. Yes, I feel like I'm voguing.
Is there a certain age where it's best to introduce social media?
Well, so do you know why Facebook and Instagram and all of them have 13 as their age? because there's a privacy law in the US called the Child Online Privacy Protection Act that forbids them to collect information on minors. And so because that law's there, that is kind of the artificial way of they say, okay, well, we're getting around this law by setting the minimum age of these platforms to 13. So that is not an indication of when teens should be online or not. It's just a legal ease thing. I can't tell you when. And this is because I remember my niece calling me and saying, Auntie Pam, she was about 7 or 8 at the time, and she said, Auntie Pam, my mom won't let me have a cell phone. How old were you when you had your first cell phone? I was like, honey, it's not going to help you. I was 22. Children are getting technology at younger and younger ages. But what I'll suggest is treating technology like you would other types of risk. For instance, riding a bike. So starting out with some training wheels. For instance, my daughter is not a teen yet. She's 4 and a half, and she's kind of addicted to Minecraft. She wants to be a YouTuber. What we do is I have Snapchat on my phone, and she loves to play with the filters. Do I put it on her tablet? No. We have some restrictions on her tablet, so where she can't see inappropriate content. And we just gave her Facebook Messenger to where she can only talk to like my mom and my sister and family members. And we do it with her. We don't do it separately. So having a period where there's co-viewing and you talking together, and yeah, parents, because you're already on your phones all the time, it's going to be an inconvenience to give your phone to your kid so they can go on social media for a bit with you, because you're gonna wanna check your work email. But do it, because it gives them those training wheels and you can talk to them about it. So instead of it being like, I'm monitoring you and I'm restricting, I'm policing, do it more as instructive, like, oh, this person sent you a friend request. Who is this person? Is this somebody you trust? And being able to talk through it so that they know that you're promoting safe engagement online rather than just abstinence of all social media and technology. That help? I know some parents might be mad at me about talking about the parental controls, so I'm trying to not get booed off the stage. Any other questions? So like for instance, when a child is younger and you first give them a phone, I would definitely look up Google Family Link. I would definitely look up some of those parental control apps, but I would evaluate them based on the features that they have and talk to your child about it. I am not an advocate of those covert programs where you're just like trying to sneak behind your kid's back and read their diary. Okay. I think I'm out of time. Sorry. He has the hook. All right, thank you guys.
Can we thank Dr. Wisniewski? I do not. You are good. Thank you, Dr. Wisniewski. That was great. Among the many things I was thinking during that was, man, I'm glad I didn't have a cell phone when I was 15. Jeez. It is time for our final presenter tonight. Alice Jordan Miles is with us. Alice graduated from Indiana University with a double major in political science and criminal justice and holds a master's degree in education from Indiana University, Purdue University, Fort Wayne. Alice currently wears numerous hats at PFW, faculty in the Department of Human Resources in the College of Professional Studies, as well as retention specialist and advisor for first-generation minority students. She is the director of the Behavioral Health and Family Studies Institute, project director of the Indiana Suicide Prevention Coalition, and chair of the Indiana State Suicide Prevention Advisory Council. Alice is a state suicide prevention specialist and trainer. She travels throughout the state providing training and consultation in suicide prevention, intervention, postvention, and mental health first aid, and leadership in mental health and cultural competency as well. Will you please welcome Alice Miles?
Thank you, Curtis. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for sticking around. This is the first time I've ever done a presentation at 8:30 at night, so I took a cup of coffee and I might be doing Zumba up here, so please bear with me. Okay, so I stand here before you and I'm gonna be talking not only from my professional perspective, but also from my personal perspective. Is my clicker up here? Is this it? Wow, eureka. So I couldn't start talking about the transition from high school to college without talking about my own daughters. Amelia, who just graduated from IU School of Media, and then my daughter Gabrielle, who just graduated from Bishop Lewis High School, is now at St. Mary's. When you talk about college transition, you have to understand that you have to look beyond your list of all the things you're gonna buy at Target and Bed Bath & Beyond. Because in order for your student to be successful at college, you need to think outside of the box, especially if your child or your student or young person, or as my daughter says, I'm an adult now, Mom. If you have a concern or know that they have a mental health condition of some sort, you really do need to consider that when contemplating and selecting a college for them in their post-secondary education. So I was doing my research, and in my research, I found this very interesting study. And it was put together by the JED Foundation, one of the leading non-for-profit organizations that is a mental health resource for collegiate mental health. They partnered with WebMD. And what they did is they presented a couple questions to area psychiatrists, mental health professionals, as well as pediatricians. And they asked them, over the last 5 years, had they seen an increase among their patients with these following issues, whether in their final years in high school and in their first years of college. And as you can see in this graph, the increases to me were astonishing. And whether you have a young person or a young adult going on to college, if these are some of the concerns that you have for your young person, please consider this when selecting a college. It is important to understand that these type of issues do not stop just because they go to college. I mean, just like if they had diabetes or if they had high blood pressure, those particular ailments do not end just because they enter college. Also, in this particular survey or research, they also interviewed 700 parents who also participated in the study. Of the 700 parents, 45% of them said that their children had a mental health issue, whether it was diagnosed or not. And 51% said that their child had seen a therapist or was seeing a therapist as they were preparing to leave for college. Yet, of those individuals, only 17% of those parents considered on-campus counseling when they were deciding on what college their young person was going to. Furthermore, even parents with teens with high anxiety, stress, and mood disorders, only 28% considered mental health services while selecting a school. And this is so critical, especially now when I'm working at the collegiate level. I am fascinated by the many students who we all considered high achievers who never had to ask for help in high school. And now when they're in college, they no longer are number one in their class because there's a lot of number ones that go to college. And frankly, they don't know how to ask for help. If they do ask for help, they feel like they're failing. They're in fear of losing a scholarship. and also they're afraid to let their parents down. When it comes to talking to your children about mental health issues, I stand before you by saying that I had to have a very frank discussion with my two daughters. I also stand before you as someone who suffers from depression each and every day. I like to be very transparent with my audiences because it is a big myth that people who suffer from depression are people who are uneducated, dirty, homeless. Someone who suffers from depression is someone like me. And that was one thing that I had to share with my daughters because, our kids put us up on a pedestal. And we have to lead by examples. Just like we talk about our physical ailments with our kids, we need to talk also with our mental health ailments as well. So in doing so, 52% of parents mentioned that they had only talked to their student about anxiety, and only 43% had discussed them about their depression. However, of those particular parents, teens had been diagnosed with a mental health disorder, and only 71% of them had talked to them about it. Now, when I had my frank discussions with my daughters, it was a very tough pill to swallow to find out that my daughter actually attempted to take her life. And I've been doing this work for a very long time. And it was because of that frank discussion that I had with her that her and I have, number one, increased our relationship, but I also understood that even though she didn't talk to me about it, she was talking to someone else. And we as parents need to stop being territorial about who our kids talk to. What we must be very happy about is that our kids talk to someone. Usually parents don't ask about mental health services until they're dropping their child off at college. It's the perfect storm. It's critical for parents to focus on the well-being of their kids while they're in college, because frankly, during their college years, 75% of all mental health conditions start at the age of 24. And during that time, college falls right in the middle of that vulnerable time. And if we don't empower our young people to talk freely about mental health as we do any other ailment, we're further isolating and further stigmatizing mental wellness. So untreated mental health does take a toll on young people. It affects their college performance. It leads to lower GPAs, a higher chance of dropping out, and it also increases the chances of them being involved or getting involved with drugs or alcohol, and unfortunately, suicide as well. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among our college students. What can we do to eliminate the mental health gap? First and foremost, start discussing mental health among our young people, with our kids at the kitchen table, at the dinner table, just like we do anything else. That really it starts eliminating that stigma among how we talk about mental health. We need to start talking to them when it's young, so that it just, when things are not right with their brain or how they're feeling, they're just as likely to share that information with you when their belly doesn't feel good or they have an earache. So talking to them early encourages, at a very young age, help-seeking behaviors. Have real conversations about mental health. I realize it's not typical. I know I come from a family, a very large family of 14 children. I'm full-blooded Latina, and we do not talk about mental health to outside of our family. As a matter of fact, our culture looks at mental health as, I've sinned against God and God is now punishing me. We need to stop that vicious cycle of ignorance when it comes to mental health. Teach them to advocate for their own mental health. It was a tough pill for me to swallow when I dropped my girls off at school, when I could no longer control what clothes they wore, what classes they took, what time they woke up, how long they stayed on the phone. We empower our kids to talk about their mental health as they do their physical health. Again, if they don't feel comfortable talking to you about it, encourage them to talk to someone, a mentor, a college campus counselor, or a friend or a colleague. If you're a person or a parent that is insistent on being involved with your young person, when you drop them off at school, make sure you sign the FERPA form. And what that stands for is Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act form. And what that means is that when you call a university, they in turn are then allowed to share information with you, no matter about their grades or about their mental health stability. I've been called every name in the book but Mary the Virgin Mother when I had a mother call me and say, I pay that tuition bill. What do you mean you can't tell me what's going on with my child? Well, they're 18 years old, and unless that form is signed by that student, no information will be released to you. Unfortunately, it's not Alice's rules. That's what the rules are at college campuses. During college visits, don't just ask about how much tuition is. Ask about counseling services. Are they free? How many counseling services does that particular student get? And how much does it cost? How do students set up an appointment? What if a student doesn't go to class for 3 days? Are there wellness checks? How long do they have to wait for counseling appointments? Are there any limits on the number of counseling sessions that a young person can have? Determine what kind of campus support is available. What kind of student-led organizations are available on campuses? There's a great program called Active Minds. It's a collegiate mental health student group that brings awareness, does activities on campuses that make students understand that it's okay to talk and share about their mental health. Consider to register your student with the college's disability office. It's not just about a physical disability. It's maybe perhaps the student has anxiety. I teach there at Purdue University. I have a number of students who have disability forms, and that means that they can take an exam in a special room, and they're given more time. It's not giving them a hand up. I mean, it's not giving them a handout. It's giving them a hand up, because universities truly do not want their students to fail. We provide them as much resources as possible to make them a successful college student. Ask your family doctor to help identify mental health providers that are in the area in which your student is going to college. And lastly, protect your investment. There is tuition insurance available that you can purchase. A lot of students won't ask or tell their parents about what's going on. Maybe college isn't for me. Maybe I need to sit out a semester. But they're hesitant to do that because they've already surpassed the date in which they'll get a 50% reimbursement or a 75% reimbursement. They're afraid that their parents are going to lose some money. Having that insurance assures them that no matter what you're feeling and no matter what time of the semester it is, you can get a full refund. Any questions? That's the fastest I've ever talked in my life. Yes.
Okay, so I don't have a college student, but I'm interested to know more. I've never heard that FERPA.
Yes.
I'm familiar with HIPAA.
Yes, it's the protection form for college students. It all started back after an incident that happened with a college student, I believe at the University of Berkeley, California, where a distraught boyfriend called and wanted to know where his ex-girlfriend was having class at. And they shared the information, yada, yada, yada. Unfortunately, that young person lost her life. Because of that, her parents worked really hard to get this form in place. And I believe it's been in place since 1991. It's just a protection form for college students. And it doesn't matter if you pay their college bill. It doesn't matter if your credit card is on file. They will not release any information to you. I've known about 3 people that have lost their job because they've released some information to a parent.
So sort of like HIPAA, but in the avenue of college information.
College information, status of information. We can't even confirm that your student is registered at the university.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Regarding that, if there's a medical
The university, what they would do is they will call the next person on, if they're admitted to a hospital per se, and that form is signed to a certain extent, depending on the protocols and the policy of that set university. I mean, how do you define an emergency? They're in the hospital? No, not really. Nope.
Now, if you're conscious, you can give permission.
You can give permission if the form is not signed, and you say, can we call your parents? They could call your parents with that permission, yes. But no, they will not release any information whatsoever. Just like they shouldn't release information under the HIPAA standards. The same rule applies. But please make sure that if you're concerned about your young person with their mental health, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed, and it's not just anxiety, mood disorders, anorexia, self-cutting, depression, stress, whatever it is, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed, make sure you ask those type of questions when you consider a college. It's so important to make sure that those resources are available. At Purdue University, Fort Wayne, each student is guaranteed 5 free counseling sessions per year. And there's not a, and I'm sure that your university would allow more if the student needed, like say for example, 6 or 7, they would be in agreement with that. Any other questions? Yes, Lori.
I have 2 real quick.
Sure.
What's the cost of the counseling after those sessions are taken?
At the university, it depends on if it's through the park. We're affiliated with Parkview, and then also we have the Helmke Center, which is a service that is provided to our community that is part of our counseling, our master's counseling program. So it's the cohort provides those services as part of their clinical hours.
My second question, sorry, is the FERPA again. Do they list who can?
Oh yeah, you can put on there who you can release information to. But you can also put on there release no information.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Is that FERPA form news to a lot of people? Oh yeah, it was news to me, believe me. It was. I mean, it's very alarming, and it's parents call over and over and over again. But during orientation, everything's new for students, and just so much. All the students and the parents are given so much information, and it kind of just like blows over their head, not intentionally, but it's just so much to take in. And FERPA's talked about at least 4 or 5 times in this last orientation session, I remember it. And if students don't sign it, they won't release it. They won't release the information, yes.
Is it only at admission, or can it happen at any?
It can happen afterwards as well. And believe me, that is uploaded on the system before you can release any information, grades, anything like that. You will have, and they won't, even if you have to pay a bill, they'll tell you, go to the website, because your student has to give you access to everything. You can't check grades. Mom, I'm not in high school, but you want to check their grades to make sure you're doing it. They have to give you access to their grades. Yes, Lori. No, it's all right.
Because obviously we have students from Lewis.
Sure.
If we're concerned, if I was concerned about somebody, can I call the college and ask for a
Well, yes, our CIT program, our CIT officers, or the director of, if they're in housing will go over there. Also, the RAs will look into the situation. But they will not say, yes, we saw them, or yes, we didn't see them. We will say, we will relay a message to them. Yes. Anything else? Yes.
So the first one is more of I guess my parents knew that I'm more of an independent type of person, so they gave me the option of like, hey, do you want us to sign the FERPA? So I did it anyways, whatever. But But then they wanted, it's kind of cool because it ties into what, I'm looking at you, I'm blanking on your name. Yeah, what you were saying is basically they asked me, they told me I can talk to them whenever, but then as they were leaving, they kind of grabbed my RA, and they're like, hey, she gets stuck in her own head. Can you just check up on her randomly? So that was a cool way that my parents kind of like respected my independence, like.
You know, and another thing
Yeah,
also is getting
definitely.
the phone number of the roommate or the you know, if there's a quad, you know, just to make sure, you know, if, you know, I've talked to Gabrielle maybe 3 times a day, and when I don't talk to her the next, you know, if I don't talk to her, I just have a panic attack about it. And I know she's okay or whatever, and I just text the roommate, hey, is Gabrielle okay? Because I know she wasn't feeling too well. But she's a big girl now. You know, she just texted me a little bit ago. I'm a big girl now, Mom. I'm a big girl now. I mean, and she's, you know, it's not my first rodeo, for heaven's sakes, and I work on a campus. But it's just, you know, it's just a little scary. It's just a little scary out there.
Definitely. And then because you do have a lot of cool experience, what would be some of your suggestions for those conversation starters of like, you're about to go to college, what are some suggestions that you give to parents to kind of just say, yo, I have a mental illness, you might have it as well?
You know, I would just say acknowledge their illness just like anything else. Meaning that, you know, in order for you want to make sure that your student knows that you support them regardless of anything. Also acknowledge that, hey, you know, you had a little difficulty in high school with your anxiety. I know you have test anxiety. Instead of waiting to the last minute and procrastinating, utilize, you know, tutoring services at Purdue. And I'm not here to promote Purdue Fort Wayne because everybody knows I'm a big IU alum. But anyway, but at Purdue Fort Wayne, we offer free tutoring session, writing sessions. Encourage students to utilize the services that are provided on college campuses. It has been my experience that students use those resources the week before finals begin. You know, it's uncool to go and be in the tutorial session or go to the writing session. And one of the things I stress so much is that I tell students, you pay for that service in your student fees. So please, you know, utilize those services, especially in the writing center. A lot of students are comma happy. Oh my goodness. I mean, they're just, oh my goodness. I said, go to the writing center. As a professor, I do not allow a student to turn in a paper without having it first being checked at the writing center. That's kind of cheesy on my part, but it's just an easy way of me trying to show them how easy it is. I mean, you're not going to turn in a monster when you go in there. I mean, I want them to get familiar with the resources that they have on campus. Frankly, there is no reason why any student on any American campus should fail, because there are so many resources that are available, because it's all about retention and graduation rates. It really is. And if anybody knows my daughters, please don't tell them I use their picture. But again, and you know, and I know Chris wants to come up here, but you know, there's one things, I have to tell you this. One of the biggest things that I've noticed is that the one type of student that as a college professor, that I am concerned about the most are the ones that are the high achievers. Because these high achievers have always been number one for 12 years. And then they come on a college campus and they're like, wow, I'm no longer number one. And they're too ashamed to ask for help. They shun themselves in the room. They don't shower. They don't eat. They don't do anything except sit there and figure out a way how to call their parents to tell them that they got an A-. Truly, that's a true story. And they just don't know how, and we tend to forget about the high-achieving students. And they're the ones that come to campus with high anxiety, high anxiety, stressing over classes and whatnot, and they're coming with eating disorders, or they ended up being cutters, and also just getting into things that they shouldn't be getting into. And it's really concerning to me, and I try to focus on my high-achieving students because they're the ones that don't know how to ask for help. I always say to them, hey, what's going on? You know, come come to a tutorial, come to a study group and encourage them. And it's not all about studying, it's also about social networking and getting together and learning and knowing about their fellow students on campus. Any questions, any more? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Time for their work tonight. A couple of things. When you registered, we collected your email. We are going to email you a SurveyMonkey link. We would love to have your feedback on this conference tonight, what you thought went well, what could be improved upon for future discussions, because this is a topic I know the Research Center here at Parkview cares about deeply and wants to continue to dive into. So we would appreciate your feedback. Also, all the presentations and the information that was collected tonight and presented will be on parkview.com probably by early next week. So if you'd like to go back and revisit any of the presentations or any of the information shared, you can do that on our website tonight, as well early next week. And can we give some thanks? Will you give a round of applause to all these names here on the screen? A lot of people put a lot of effort into tonight. The Parkview Research Center team, the Miro team, a lot of people put a lot of effort into making tonight a success, so we did want to thank them. Thank you all for being here. Have a great rest of your night.